When I started thinking about panel discussion topics to observe Women's History Month, it took me about 30 seconds to settle on women in politics as a subject ripe for being dissected. A little more than a year ago, Hillary Clinton was, as you'll recall, the candidate to beat for the Democratic nomination, and her second place finish to Barack Obama has left pundits analyzing the role of sex in American politics probably ad nauseum. They got some fresh fodder late last summer when John McCain surprised just about everybody with his choice of Governor Sarah Palin as his vice presidential running mate. And closer to home, the Indiana General Assembly is considering a move that might eliminate the offices of many women elected officials, including one of our distinguished panelists. And we're going to talk about that as well. We've assembled a terrific group of panelists who are going to analyze women in politics from several different perspectives. They all have different experiences and different areas of expertise, and hopefully that will make for a lot of lively discussion. Christine Erickson is an associate professor of history who specializes in U.S. women's history and 20th century American history, and she is the second from the right over here. Georgia Wralstad-Ulmschneider is an associate professor of political science, a lawyer who specializes in constitutional law, civil liberties, and the First Amendment. Therese Brown, who's in the red, is the clerk of courts for Allen County, a longtime participant and observer of the political scene in Allen County. And Mae Johnson is an Allen County Council member who can also look at women in politics from a mass media vantage point. She's a former anchor at WKRC in Cincinnati and was the corporate public affairs for Taft Broadcasting for 19 years. And so she's seen things from a somewhat different perspective. Our moderator over here on my right is Andy Downs, assistant professor of political science and director of the Mike Downs Center for Indiana Politics. And I'll let Andy take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the panelists for showing up, and thanks also to CATV for recording. Well, you never know when you invite panelists to come in. You have to be a little concerned that they might not actually show, but I didn't have that concern with you all, I'm sure. CATV for recording this and broadcasting. It's very kind of them, and I don't want to take any more time up. I want to get straight into it. The first question, I would like either Georgia or Chris to try and answer this one. There were two very high-profile female candidates in 2008. Some people said this was the year of the woman. Was 2008 the year of the woman?
I guess I'll start first. Talk a little bit about facts. While in some way I think we can all understand why the media chose to do this, given the vice presidency of Sarah Palin and the presidential candidacy of Hillary Clinton, I think it kind of underscores the idea that women in politics at the national level appears to kind of be a new event for people kind of at the national level. And the problem is that both at the presidential level and vice presidential level, there have been many a woman before. And so I hesitate to call 2008 the year of the woman in terms of kind of the presidential or vice presidential level. For instance, that would be forgetting Carol Moseley Braun, who ran for president in 2004 on the Democratic ticket. It would forget Elizabeth Dole in 2000, who ran on the Republican ticket. It would forget Shirley Chisholm, who ran in 1972 on the Democratic ticket. It would forget in 1964 Margaret Chase Smith, who ran on the Republican ticket, all in kind of more recent historical memory for the presidential contest. And of course, then in 1984, Geraldine Ferraro was the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic ticket, along with Walter Mondale. The other thing that I would say, and then I'll let Chris kind of continue, is it depends upon the level that you look in terms of the year of the woman in 2008. While it is true that we had these high-profile candidates at both the presidential and vice presidential level, and I should also point out, for the first time in history, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is a woman. If you look at other levels, the picture might not be quite as rosy. For instance, in 2008, at the state executive level across the country, the percentage of women went down. The high was actually in 1999. So touting the Year of the Woman at that level would, I think, be kind of inaccurate. Chris?
Just to kind of take off from what Georgia was saying, I think 2008, no matter what the way you look at it, is a remarkable year. For the first time in our history, you could be assured whether you pull the lever for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, you're going to put a woman in office. And I think the contribution of both Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin is that they have normalized the idea of a woman in the White House. Right? So from this point on, I don't think any American, or most Americans, will question the idea of a woman running for the highest office in our land. But having said that, I would also agree with Georgia that this label, this kind of media-driven label of woman, or the Year of the Woman, is problematic. It makes it seem that it is a fad, it's a passing fancy, and that we can just kind of ascribe this label to some remarkable campaigns by women, rather than kind of a long-term phenomenon that's been slowly growing over time. I mean, this is what Senator Barbara Mikulski of Maryland put it, and she's referring to 1992, which was officially the Year of the Woman. And she said, calling 1992 the Year of the Woman makes it sound like the year of the caribou or the year of the asparagus. We're not a fad, a fancy, or a year. And I would agree with that assessment. Again, we're growing, we're getting more representation, but, it is growing slowly, but we've been doing this for a very long time.
Well, let's follow up a little bit. There also, we know if we look deeper in the ballot, quite often, third-party candidates or minor party candidates, we can find women who were presidential nominees, vice presidential nominees. So why is it that minor party candidates have been willing to embrace female candidates before the major party candidates? And for that matter, who do you think were some of the more memorable candidates fall into that category? Georgia or Chris again?
I guess, should I start again, Chris, or do you want to start this time?
Well, I'll just say that it's, I think one of the reasons why minor party candidates have embraced women, and that women have flocked to many minority parties, is that the major parties have traditionally not accepted women. Certainly that's been the case throughout the 19th century and into the earlier 20th century, and that the major parties pretty much rejected women's participation. I think women traditionally have found other avenues of political participation through movements, through groups, through ways of influencing politics, and not necessarily moving into the political realm itself. I mean, even after the suffrage in 1920, there were a lot of women, conservative and progressive women, who felt uneasy about delving into politics. It was still considered a man's business for many people. So I would just say, for the most part, it's because a lot of these traditional, the Democratic and Republican Party, have just not really welcomed women full-time.
Georgia?
I totally agree with Chris, and what I would add is it's not welcoming women as candidates, and also maybe not welcoming the kind of values that women were interested in or issues that women were interested in. And I also want to caution that when you see women candidates in minor parties, you need to remember it's a minor party. By definition, we are a two-party system where one of only the two major parties wins office. So that when minor parties run women candidates, part of it is that minor parties sometimes have trouble attracting male candidates to run. And minor parties want credibility by filling a ballot, and so women are willing to fill that ballot. So before we kind of just wave the flag in favor of women and minor parties, it may have something to do with women in a way become the sacrificial lamb, the candidate for the minor party that can't win. Also, minor parties very often will take up an issue that has been kind of thrown off by the two major parties. And there have been historically women throughout time that have been part of the minor party. I think one of the most kind of interesting women candidates of a minor party that people might not be aware of that historically is kind of interesting is Toni Natham in 1972. I'm just going to mention her name because she was the vice presidential candidate on the Libertarian Party. And she's the first woman to ever win an electoral vote in a presidential competition. And I doubt people know that. So that's kind of a name of a person that might not be obvious, but important.
All right. Well, Therese, you have run in several primaries, 4 general elections, 2 times against men, 2 times against women. You've been successful each time. We should probably point that out to everybody. You've been successful each time. And you are a member of one of the 2 major parties. You're a Republican. Is there a difference, do you think, when you were running against a man versus running against a woman?
I think part of it, I think yes and no. Keeping in mind the 2 offices that I held and or hold, and that being auditor and being clerk of the court, I think part of this can go down the road of whether a man's going to step out and be interested in that type of work. What is their goal? What is their ambition? I did work my way up through the ranks, if you will, and became auditor. The external force was getting a candidate on the ballot to run for the seat. So I think in my case it was experience, and in that particular instance, the male that ran against me, it was a challenge to make sure there was a challenger there. From a female standpoint, it was a little bit harder. I had one individual who was an attorney by trade and having a degree, a master's degree in business administration, so it laid it to a different standpoint. So I don't know if it necessarily was a situation of male versus female, qualified versus unqualified, experience in the mix, but it definitely made it a little more interesting running against men versus women. It was more of a challenge, I think, for me, and no disrespect to any males in the room or watching, more of a challenge running against a woman than it was running against the man, because there was no experience for those 2 individuals in the realm that they were looking for the position to run, that they wanted to vie for, obviously.
And really, in terms of those male candidates, not to drop names here, but one of them has seen some electoral success, and the
Yes.
other was really a place filler,
Absolutely.
to be very honest. And when you were elected auditor, you were actually, you succeeded a woman, correct?
Correct.
And same for clerk of the courts.
Yes, sir.
In fact, the clerk of the courts position has been held by a woman for, we have to go back several decades before we can find a
Yes.
man who held that position, right?
Mid-60s.
Yeah. Well, May, your victory in 2006 was against a man. In 2003, you were one of 2 women on the ballot running for city council at large. Let's remind everybody you're a member of county council right now. 2006, you won that seat. In 2003, you were one of 2 women running. What role did gender play in those 2 races? Did you notice a difference when you were running for those at-large positions versus running for the individual district seat?
I don't really think gender had too much to do with anything. That wasn't a factor. It wasn't a factor that I really considered. I stayed with the issues. When I was elected to Allen County Council, I believe the hot-button issue at that time was consolidation. I had been very active on the issues of neighborhood revitalization, redistricting, which meant to me making sure that we didn't have taxation without representation, and also consolidation, which I had real issues with. I remember going to New Haven, because New Haven is in the 1st District. There was a large group of people there, primarily from New Haven and some of the neighboring communities. And I simply talked about what I believed. I had issues with consolidation and people not being represented. And I really think I picked up a few votes in New Haven. And I also looked at the area, the district seat that I was running for, and that was Wayne Township, and I know who's in Wayne Township and what the numbers are. So I think there are a lot of factors to weigh when you run for office, but the issue of the fact that I was running against a male opponent, I really didn't give it much thought at all. I think it's what you have to say, where you are on the issues, and I think people are beginning to listen. Plus, I also, if I remember correctly, I had a lot of publicity. I have been very outspoken since I came back to my hometown of Fort Wayne. I got to meet a lot of people. I did engaged in a lot of volunteer activities. So there's more than one route into the whole political forum. I think I took the right one. But I think it's different. I think people are more broad-minded. I know that sexism still exists, but I have to be honest, I didn't think much about it. I simply thought there was a need and I could fill it.
Well, I have 2 quotes from Shirley Chisholm. I want your reaction to them. If a lot of people know what the quotes are already. Of my 2 handicaps, being female put more obstacles in my path than being black. That's the first one. And the second one, I've always met more discrimination being a woman than being black. What's your experience?
Well, there have been times when I've had to scratch my head and wonder, what's really getting in my way the most? The fact that I'm black, the fact that I'm female. And I have to tell you, Andy, I think that I have probably suffered discrimination on both fronts. However, there have been men who have been very supportive of me in terms of what I've wanted to do in politics. Again, it goes back to the issues. Probably color has had more to do with it. But I can't really say that I think that's been a real factor, and I don't think it will in the future. I think if you work hard, I think if you stay true to what you ran for. In other words, don't run on one thing and conveniently forget that, because I think Hoosiers in particular remember what you say and they will remind you. I don't think it's a factor, and I'll tell you what's happened over the past few months with the election of a black president. I don't think race is a major factor anymore. I think if you build a sound organization, I think you can win. That's already been demonstrated. I think America is willing to move past all of that, sex, race, and that's what I'm telling myself anyhow, because I have to admit that I didn't believe it. There was a long-time politician, someone that I have a lot of respect for, who opened up my eyes to the potential of Barack Obama becoming president. He simply reminded me that I needed to do my homework, and that was Graham Richard. And this was 3 years ago. And I said, he's an excellent candidate, and I have high hopes for him for the future, but it's just too soon. This is Hillary's year. This is Hillary's time. Well, I'm so glad I was wrong.
Now, earlier, before we started, Georgia actually had another quote regarding what it's like to be a female, in this case, office holder. What was that quote, Georgia?
Well, this is about the same time that Shirley Chisholm said what she said. There was a woman, Pat Schroeder, in 1972, who was the first woman with small children elected to the House of Representatives. And she was welcomed in the House of Representatives by a well-known kind of feminist icon, Bella Abzug, who wore big hats, very flamboyant. Anyway, and when she was welcomed, what Bella said to Pat was, "I hear you have small children. You won't be able to do the job."
Wow.
So what's kind of interesting in this mix is when Andy asked the question of Therese in May, is it different from a man or a woman? People always think of discrimination in terms of sex, men to women. But it's interesting to see Bella's reaction to Pat Schroeder, because gender stereotype kind of flows through everyone in a way, at least in 1972. So I thought that was very interesting.
And women certainly have issues with other women, right?
Exactly.
Because your place is in the home to raise your children.
It definitely creates a situation where a person definitely looks at you and your age, where you're at, regardless of how much experience. And I went through that. I had almost teenagers when I ran the first time, 9 and 12. So it's splitting your time between a spouse, a working individual, and a parent, and all the things that go with it. Can they do it? And I'm sure that sits in the back of the mind, but it just, it depending on where you're at, where your support system is, can help overcome a lot. But people do tend to judge you as to whether or not, well, you might be going off and having babies, so I don't know. Might not be able to put the work effort into the job.
Studies suggest that women enter politics later in life than their male counterparts. And because of that, the pipeline to higher office can be blocked a little bit because you start at a later time, because family constraint is greater in women candidates, and that seems to still be the case among most studies.
I would agree.
Chris, you have another
Yeah, I was just going to say that this is another change that we see with Sarah Palin coming in this year, is that really for the first time publicly, conservatives had to acknowledge that a woman can be a mother of a large family and a mother of a special needs child. She can be a mother and run a large state at the same time. And so there's no talk about Palin neglecting her husband, neglecting her children, any of that stuff. These aren't sins anymore, as kind of the far, the right wing of the conservative political people go. They're just normal challenges that every family faces. And so that's a real change we begin to see.
And we actually just go back to Governor of Massachusetts, who actually gave birth while being governor.
That's right.
Yeah. So
But she also left office.
Yes, she did. Yes. Now, I'd like to throw a question out to everybody. Who's sort of the memorable candidate, female candidate for you? Is there one you look at and say, she is the candidate who made me think I wanted to run for office, or she is the candidate who I think sort of typifies a good candidate? So it's not just for me and Therese. Georgia and Chris, you have to answer as well. Who's the memorable candidate in your mind?
Well, for me, it would have to be, and this is dating myself, Gloria Gagline. Gloria was the auditor before Linda Bloom, who was my employer, and hard to believe, but I've been in this game for about 31 years, but worked for quite a few different elected officials. And Gloria always came across as a person with strong convictions, very high integrity, an individual, and having passed, I mean, it's kind of somebody you kind of miss after a while. You could bounce ideas off of. She held everything in very high regard, regardless of political persuasion. She wanted to make sure she did the job right, and just definitely someone for me that I looked up to a lot, that said I could attain that.
Yeah, and elected to more than one office. You spent a fair amount of time down in the General Assembly as well.
Yep.
May, it looked like you're ready to tell us who yours is.
Well, I'm going to travel a ways. I remember really being influenced by Golda Meir and the role that she played in terms of leading her country forward. Maggie Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher. I was also impressed with, didn't agree with her positions all the time, but in terms of the way she ran her politics, I was impressed. I've probably been impressed by more men than women. And again, I'm going to date myself, but I think Lyndon Baines Johnson, and when you really study this man and the role that he played in terms of civil rights, being a Southerner, and the iron hand in the way he ran the Senate, I was impressed with LBJ as well.
Chris?
And Bill Clinton. I don't want to. And, I may have had my issues with Bill during this last campaign, but to me, he still is one of the most brilliant politicians in my lifetime.
Chris?
I would choose somebody who never ran for office, and that's Eleanor Roosevelt. I think she was somebody who had enormous influence in shaping the Democratic Party in the 1920s and in the 1930s, bringing women into the party and pushing FDR more to the left. What are you going to do for women, especially what are you going to do for blacks, what are you going to do for tenant farmers? So to my mind, she's one of the most influential political women, even though she didn't hold office.
Georgia?
Well, there are a lot of women that I think are kind of important as politicians. I'll choose someone a little different as well. I'm going to choose Margaret Chase Smith for a different reason. One is Margaret Chase Smith went to the Congress, the House, and then to the Senate as a widow, which is for a long time the way that women tended to get to Congress, mediated by their husbands or their fathers. But Margaret Chase Smith was one of the widows that then was able to kind of stand on her own, come out of the light of widowhood, move from the House to the Senate, and also why I really admire her is she used the stereotype of women as kind of more moral to do something that none of her male colleagues would do in the Senate. She was the first one to call out McCarthy in the 1950s. And so I find that really impressive.
Yeah, and that is one of the great speeches of all time,
Yeah.
too. Well, Therese, I want to come back to you. The office you hold right now, Clerk of the Courts, if we look throughout the state of Indiana, 90-plus clerks, the majority of them, if I remember right, are female at this time. And it's one of the offices that is targeted by the overall concept of restructuring. What's your reaction to that? Do you think that have these offices been targeted because they're held by women, or are they sort of second-class offices, and that's why women have the electoral success there? Why do you think these are targeted for elimination?
Truly? Bite my tongue. I think that there is, as May and I have discussed previous to starting this program, I mean, there's always room for improvement in government, and one would never be remiss in needing to state that. I mean, it's a given, and it's a living, breathing situation, but my perspective, if you will, is that it is a representation of the people and the people's will. And to me, the Constitution, and we can go to the Constitution of the United States as much as the Constitution of the state of Indiana. I feel like I'm making an oath right now, but ultimately, though it is perceived as an old document, it was set in motion for a reason, and it's there to be maybe a level of amended, but I think you kind of hit a little on the edge there. Just if things are broken, yes, you need to fix them, but I don't see them needing to be fixed in the way that they're being offered. I think women definitely do take these positions at times as definite stepping stones to higher office. You can see that when you look at the different state legislators that we have come from the clerk's office, auditor's office, treasurer's office, etc., county councils, commissioners. They have worked their way up to become state senators, and specifically, if you look at our Lieutenant Governor Becky Skillman was both a recorder and a clerk of the court. So it's a restructuring that meets a whole different mindset in some aspect, but ultimately it would take away from women the opportunity to get a foot in the door. I think it's a situation where it's the first place you can go to actually have some effect on what's happening in your local community. And I think that if the mass change happens in the way that it's presented, it takes away the right of the people to choose what happens in their community locally. The single county executive, I mean, we had 2 female commissioners up until the last, Bill Brown beating Marla Irving, but it also takes away the opportunity of debate, even in that environment, for the public to have open communication in a public forum. When you have a single executive, you don't have quite that input that you all would want to have on a subject matter like you have in a city structure. I think, I mean, the motive to save money, sometimes we get caught up in saving money versus what the goal is here, and that is to have effective government led by what the people want versus what the top wants to have happen. So I think it would be detrimental to women, definitely, in being able to enter the arena and have their voice heard, whatever that subject matter is that they want to put out, not only at the local level, but also working its way up to the state or federal level.
So, Georgia, this sounds sort of like to use the baseball term, the farm system is getting undermined here. Where do we see success for female candidates? Is there a pipeline? Are there certain levels of offices or types of offices where women are more likely to be successful?
Yeah, in fact, there are a lot of studies on this, and there is kind of a pipeline. As a rule, because as I said before, women kind of start out later. Women populate local government positions much more than state or obviously national positions. Also, the other thing that you'll notice is that on a statewide level, what you see is women legislators. You don't see as many women in what I would call executive elected positions, governors, etc., with the exception of like state superintendent of public instruction, which is, of course, kind of education is associated with women. That's important. And the other thing that I think is kind of important to pay attention is even in state legislatures, you need to look kind of across the country at various state legislatures. They differ a lot. Political scientists talk about how there are different kind of political traditions in different states. And they generally fall into 3 categories. A category called traditional political culture, a category called moralistic political culture, and a category called professional political culture. And given those political cultures, the legislative structure varies. In a moralistic political culture, you have a large legislature because a moralistic political culture thinks that politics is something everybody should do. So legislatures should be great big, and politicians should be amateurs in the sense of not professionals. Those are the legislatures dominated by women. New Hampshire, Vermont, etc. In traditional legislatures, they tended to be in the South, where kind of elites, social elites, populate them. You don't see women as much. And again, in professional legislatures, again, the name kind of says everything. You don't see women as much. So you have to pay attention to that. Women populate state legislatures in kind of moralistic kind of political culture. So especially kind of the Northeast, a little around Minnesota, Wisconsin, Washington State, etc. So there are real differences.
Well, I want to come back to 2008 now. In 2008, we saw Hillary Clinton in a bar doing shots or having drinks with somebody. I don't remember what it was. I just remember she was there having drinks with people. I have 2 questions. Was she doing this as some sort of way to show she's manly and can drink everyone under the table, or do what men do? Or was she just trying to prove that she was some sort of average Joe without the E on the end?
My perception, I want to be perceived as the average Joe. I think that that particular individual may be perceived as not being in the same realm as the average person, and that would be a common denominator if you're trying to get the middle class, the blue collar. You're trying to pull in all aspects that I can go down to XYZ Bar and Grill on a Friday night and have a happy hour drink, and I have the same issues and the same problems and concerns that you do. That was my perception. I didn't think it was wrong by any stretch, but it's an icebreaker kind of a thing. I don't know, how did you
I think it's necessary to meet people where they are. And you have to be comfortable. If you're running for office, whether you get an invitation or not, which means that you sometimes have to wade into what you consider unfriendly waters. But that's part of the landscape as well. And I think that's probably what Hillary was doing. I don't think she was there knocking them back to impress, you know what I mean, the Friday night, the local, Friday night crowd.
I would say that it has a component of gender, but not the way that you might think. Like she could drink as much as a guy. It's that normally women's advantage is, as candidates, is they're perceived as the outsider, which can be very important in an election when people are fed up with Washington. The trouble is, there was another outsider equally as outside named Barack Obama. And she appeared more of the insider.
Yes, she did.
Because of her stint as the First Lady, etc. So I would suggest she was trying to recapture her kind of outsider back with kind of regular Joe. And it's only in that sense does I think gender equates.
Well, I think at that point, desperation had kind of set in because it appeared to me that because both of these candidates, Obama and Hillary Clinton, had very similar platforms. They were almost the same on many issues. But in terms of organization, I think he had the superior organization. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm a student of community organizing. That's really how I got here. And that started in Fort Wayne before some of the people in this room were born. But I think Hillary was grasping at that point. And I think some of the folks in her organization kind of let her down as well.
Yeah, I think it was and I'd agree with everything here. It was also taking kind of a shot at Obama, who is being perceived as elite, right? And elite people don't go into a working class bar and start downing whiskey, right? They have martinis or whatever, or Cosmos or whatever they have. And so it's kind of getting back. I want to be a normal, everyday Joe or Jane or however you want to term it, and to separate herself and to make that distinction between herself and Obama.
So women occasionally get this reputation as being more bipartisan, more willing to work with the other side than men. Do they deserve this reputation?
I don't know if you want to, to me kind of takes, that's a negative. I think from a female standpoint, we're nurturers by nature. We are individuals. We don't particularly like conflict, but we have to go there when we have to go there. But I think that's a heck of an attribute to bring to the table when you get into a situation where you have to mediate or you're trying to get a point across, that you don't necessarily have to hold that same position till death because I've now stuck my neck out. We're more apt to try to work through an issue because we want to see some gain in the end. So sometimes I think we cut our nose to spite our face. We might take less than, which is an unfortunate female problem as well. But I think we do try to facilitate that.
It's an attribute that I aspire to. I think that women, the nurturing part, I think that depends on the woman. And I think you get into trouble when you start, we all don't fit one mold. But I'm going to go back to Cincinnati here for just a moment. A lot was accomplished at one time in that city because you had a group of Republicans and Democrats who came together and became charterites and who got past partisan issues to get something done in Cincinnati and Hamilton County. And we need to find a way to do that here in Allen County. I don't know whether women are more inclined to do that. I think some women are and some aren't. And I think women can be just as tough in terms of politics as men. In fact, we know that.
Chris?
Well, I was about to say, I think when you start going down the road of are women more bipartisan or more nurturing or what have you, you're going to start running into some problems because I think as you were pointing out, it depends upon the woman. I mean, we've got somebody like Maggie Thatcher, Jean Kirkpatrick. We've got people, Hillary Clinton was talking about, willing to use the military force whenever possible, and she would be happy to do that. And so I think we run into some problematic areas when we start attributing these kind of characteristics to women as a whole.
And I would say women candidates can run into problems as well because there are certain stereotypes that voters do attribute to one sex or the other. And so when you're in a position to have to counter that stereotype, then you drop pretty far. And that's always a problem. So that women candidates are constantly trying to kind of morph between, I'm tough, but I'm caring.
Right.
Yeah. I fight for families. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit of the male, a little bit of the female. I think that's always a problem, stereotype.
Of course, one of the nice things about panels is when we have folks in the audience who have questions they want to ask, and so now it is your turn to ask questions. Does anybody have a question for this fine panel? Don't all jump up at once. Go ahead.
I do. I'd like to go a little bit back to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and have you guys talk a little bit about. There was a perception that it was like less than a year ago, or a little more than a year ago. The perception was that this was Hillary's year. This was Hillary's campaign to lose, and and she was the shoo-in. She was the shoo-in. It was everybody by acclamation. Other people argued that Obama won by organizing brilliantly and by understanding the way that the country had changed and going after the purple states and things like that. Did Hillary lose or did Obama win?
That sounds like a one-word answer from everybody. not to put pressure on anyone, but
I would say both.
Okay.
And one thing that I would say is that early on in the Clinton campaign, as I was watching it, and I also teach courses on women in politics as well, that I thought about Clinton's advisors. And I don't know for sure, but I fear that these campaign advisors that are well-schooled and well-read have not read the studies on women candidates. Because how a woman candidate runs at a national or statewide level is a little bit different than how male candidates run because of stereotypes sometimes. And I thought there were times at which those studies would have been valuable to Hillary Clinton. For instance, it took her a while to attack a little bit Barack Obama. She did it later on, and she made there was some traction. And I thought a lot of studies will suggest, and you've all heard it, you don't hit a girl. Well, that carries over to politics, and it's hard for a male opponent, it's harder for a male opponent to hit back. So an earlier attack, if not on the person of Barack Obama, but on his issues, might have been helpful. So I would say that. I'm not sure that her early campaign advisors well served her in all circumstances.
I want to make a quick plug for something. I'm going to ask May, because I know May saw both sides of that, wanting Hillary and Barack at both at different times. But I want to make a quick plug for George's Women in Politics class, where you actually get to not only read those studies, but then put together a mock campaign for somebody with all sorts of wonderful twists and turns along the way. So, May.
Well, I think I said earlier, and just to comment on some of what you said in regards to, I don't think Hillary was advised well early on, and I think that she lost ground because she took some bad advice. But I also think that Hillary was up against a candidate that just seemed unstoppable. In terms of communicating, and you all, I've studied a lot of communicators. This man is superb. And I think the organization made a difference. It was also, I think, more difficult for Hillary as a woman. You know, I remember it appeared to me that she was struggling even in terms of how to dress. You know what I mean? I don't think I saw Hillary in a skirt the whole time she ran. You know, these little pantsuits and what have you.
And Obama wouldn't have to worry about that, would he?
Didn't have to worry about it. Could take off his coat, roll up his sleeves, and all. So there are some issues that women have to deal with. And then here comes Sarah Palin, you know what I mean, with the beehive and then the glasses. But I mean, Sarah was cute. She was cute.
Yeah.
It served her well. I thought it did. I mean, the level of coverage. So, listen, what happened, Barack won, and I don't think we have to argue about that. We don't have to debate that.
Of course, if Barack had considered wearing a skirt, it might have been
It would have made a big difference. It would have made difference. But you know, I think the country, I really feel that the country benefited. The country won because you have two people. And no one is going to take away from Hillary Clinton's ability to lead. She does have experience, valuable experience that will serve this country well. So I'm pleased with the outcome.
I wanted to just say one thing related to what May was saying about dress. Also, you saw all the commentary on how much did the Republican Party at all pay for outfits, etc. Come on. Did you hear that about John McCain or Barack Obama?
No.
Again, you had that idea of clothing and style and the change in glasses. That's not something you see in a male candidate. It's just not.
Well, and the substance too. I mean, we can go to the Biden-Palin debates, and you know the no fighting, you know, hitting a woman.
Right.
It was very obvious of where the line was in that, definitely the first debate where she came out a couple times really hitting, whether she was hitting her point right or wrong, irrelevant. He bit his tongue, and you could tell it's I can't say anything because
Exactly.
Right.
she's a woman.
That's
It's
right.
going to get taken wrong. My points are going to go down. So it's kind of a disadvantage for the man as much as it is for the woman. It's not putting the issues out.
Yes. David,
Yeah, I'm curious. So, the last few years, you've heard more reference to the mother role. For instance, Nancy Pelosi, when she was raising her voice, she'd say, "I'm going to use my mom voice." Right? I mean, this is it. She's bringing order to this unruly family, and she's claiming the role of the mother and that authority. Of course, Sarah Palin the same way. You know, she surrounds herself with her kids. So I'm curious whether you see going into the future, maybe the traditional role of the mother and nurturer or justice bringer to the family might start being embraced more by women. I mean, is there going to be a place for the mother in chief rather than, a father figure of the nation instead of a mother for a nation?
I think women have to be who they are. And I don't think, I think it's a bad idea to really look at every woman as this great nurturer and center of the home and what have you, because there are women who struggle with that, quite frankly. It's easier for some women than for others. But I do think the age factor, which you pointed out, I think if you're older and your children are grown, as in my case, my son had finished school, he was on his own, I'm single, so it's whatever I want to do. But as a wife and mother, I think it's more difficult in some ways for a woman unless she really has strong support systems. But I think she has to proceed. I really think women should run for everything. Whether it's a traditional route or not, if you feel you have something to offer, then I think you should run. And I think women should really stop letting anyone define who they are. If you're comfortable in your own skin, go for it.
I think it does definitely come back to support system, but then it can go the opposite direction for me. And from a male standpoint, the male stepping in as the father and being more the caretaker. I mean, you see that a lot more in the last 10 to 15 years for sure, that if a woman can do it, a man can do it too. I kind of struggle with that on Saturdays cleaning the house, but it's okay. I mean, you can do all kinds of things. I think we may finally have gotten over that I am woman, hear me roar, I've got to do all these things, and if I don't do them all in this exact order, I am insufficient, I am incomplete. Right. We do have to make choices whether a man or a woman, but I think definitely that there is opportunity for this to continue to move that direction, that women will be juggling babies and doing it all, but not all in the sense of to someone else's satisfaction, back to yours, that they're going to have to be comfortable in themselves, know what they want, and be able to put what choices have to be made.
So the house isn't spotlessly clean.
Priorities. It's all about prioritization.
Right. You have to prioritize, right?
Chris? Another question from the audience then. Yes, Jamie.
I thought I'd bring up a branch of government we haven't talked about yet. Our U.S. Supreme Court has had very few women represented on it, and now there's only one woman on our Supreme Court. I was wondering if you could say a few words about the challenges women face getting onto that august body, and also maybe something about the influence that women have had as justices.
I'm going to make another shameless plug for one of George's classes. She teaches this subject. She actually teaches a course on the Supreme Court where you will get to play the role of a justice if you take it. So George's classes are fun and educational, too. So, George, I think you have to answer this question first.
Well, I think, as most people know, Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman who was appointed to the Supreme Court by Ronald Reagan in 1981, in part to assuage critics that he was anti-woman. And to make a plug, at the last omnibus lecture this year, Justice O'Connor will be the featured speaker, so that you might want to see her as well. Right now, the second woman that's ever been on the court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is the only woman left, as Professor Toole has said, and you may know that she is battling pancreatic cancer right now. It has been very difficult for women to get on courts in general, on the Supreme Court in particular. The first woman that was taken seriously for the Supreme Court was in the 1930s, when Chris was talking about Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was a champion of a woman named Florence Allen, who actually sat on the Sixth Circuit out of Cincinnati. And she was very well thought of. She wrote the very famous Tennessee Valley Authority case, and she was touted highly. Roosevelt, much as many presidents do, ran her candidacy by the current members of the Supreme Court who said, And so it was many, many years, obviously, before Sandra Day O'Connor. I think that there's no doubt O'Connor was very upset when she was not replaced by another woman. I think there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure on Barack Obama to make an appointment for a woman on the court. As far as what studies there are about what difference it makes that women are on the courts, there are so few women on the Supreme Court, we can't really study it. Right. But at lower levels, it does appear to make a difference. Women justices and judges at lower levels tend to, outcomes are different in certain areas of the law, in areas of family law in particular, et cetera, so that there are some differences.
Actually, I'd like to hear Therese, since we're talking about Supreme, let's bring it down to the local level. Yes, the courts that you oversee here, we do have a couple of female judges in Allen County. Do you notice a difference?
In their
in the
direction
way they
express justice,
in the way they express justice, and the way they manage the courts?
Actually, no. I mean, they are very straightforward. There's no bias as far as I can see. I can say from an administrative side, they both are the administrative judges for their respective sides, so keep that in mind. But Judge Frank Gull is a very, very articulate, very straightforward criminal court judge, and Judge Nancy Boyer being on the civil side. They both do a very good job. I mean, I don't believe the voters would have kept them in the positions that they're in, or there would not have been an attorney, whether male or female, would have been afraid to step forward if they felt that they weren't doing the work that they, to the level they should be. So no.
I'm curious as to whether any of your studies deal with the women, with the role that women have played behind the scenes in determining who the candidates are, and because women have played a tremendous role. Fortunately, I can't think of any names at this point, but there have been women in very powerful places who have really determined who the lead candidates would be for both parties, and this has been going on for a long time. Hopefully they will concentrate some of their efforts and more of their efforts to help women, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
achieve higher office.
There are not a lot of studies, Jess, and it's interesting about, for instance, women campaign managers like Donna Brazile, but even early on, or women in higher positions in the party elite, which was very common during the Roosevelt era, less common for a while. On both sides of the aisle, in terms of Republicans and Democrats, there's simply not a lot there, because I've searched when my students read kind of women in politics. I don't want them just reading about voting or about office holding. I want them to read about campaign managers, movements, as
the king makers.
Yeah.
Well, we have, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to add very, very briefly about the impact of women. And I go back to the 1930s. Eleanor Roosevelt was responsible for getting Molly Dewson into the New Deal, and she becomes head of the Democratic Party, the women's division of the Democratic Party. Dewson is responsible for a couple of things, not only bringing the first female cabinet member on board, Frances Perkins, the Secretary of Labor, but she's also responsible, along with Perkins and some other reformers, for getting Social Security passed. And so there's a lot of influence there, but not necessarily at the political party running for office kind of thing.
We have just a few minutes left, so I'd like to give each of you a chance to make a last, 30 seconds or so statement about women in politics, whether it's about the role they play, the role they should play, recruitment of women to being involved in things. You get about 30 seconds to make some sort of a pitch for something. I know it's not a lot, but I know May is almost never at a loss for words. So I'm going to start down there, May.
Excuse me, I did play a small role in this past election. I did do some work with the on-the-ground team for Barack Obama. And just to see the young people and young women, Sonia Rodriguez, I think is the young woman. Sophia. And to see young women getting involved was just terribly encouraging to me. It was wonderful. And, you know, and to feel that energy, and it's still there. It's still there. And I would really like to see women, doesn't matter what the office, get involved in the political process. There's so much work to be done, you know, but I know my doorbell, I went to the door several times. I mean, they were there every day. And these were young people, college students, and it was just one of the most rewarding things that I can remember.
Therese?
I would say that keep your eyes and ears open. I think it's extremely important that regardless of the gender, that people pay attention to what's happening, not only at the state level and the federal level, but at the local level. I mean, whether it's city government, county government, township government, there's articles in the paper, everybody's going to have a position. Stay engaged to the debate. It's important to make sure that you know. It's important how you vote. It can come down. We've had a couple. I know I've only had 2 little minor opportunities for recounts. Not that I'm looking forward to that by any stretch. Spending time with Andy is always
They're
fun.
They're fun.
They're fun. I know. He's a sick person, those of you in the audience that know him only too well. But we do have a good time, right or wrong. But staying connected is extremely important. So if being female, it's been rewarding. It's been challenging. But it's been worthwhile.
Chris?
I would just add, kind of echo both of your statements saying get involved. And I think women, young women and men, college-age folks, should pay attention, get involved in political campaigns. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than getting involved in a political campaign, as we see this year with both Hillary Clinton and especially Barack Obama. So.
Georgia?
Take my 20 seconds.
And I guess I would say never underestimate the amount of political involvement that women have always had in politics. You can't just look at voting.
Right.
You can't just look at parties. Women have been involved in social movements and social change of all kinds for a long time.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming out today. This is one of a number of events for Women's History Month. It was brought to you by the Center for Women and Returning Adults, as well as the American Democracy Project. Our panelists were right here next to me, Associate Professor Georgia Wralstad-Ulmschneider from Political Science, Associate Professor Chris Erickson from History, County Clerk Therese Brown, and at the end, County Council Member Mae Johnson. Thank you all very much for joining us. Give them a round of applause, please.